Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Daphne. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. It is my pleasure to present my co-host, Cindy Warwick, who is in charge of our Author Talk series, as well as our guest for today, Jane Kelly, which Cindy will go into the proper introduction in just a moment. But before we jump into that, just a few housekeeping items to go through. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program today, but you can submit them at any time using the questions box in the GoToWebinar dashboard. For those of you who might not be familiar with GoToWebinar, this is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac laptop or desktop. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard is going to look a little bit different depending on the device you're using, but all of the features will still be there. At any point, if you're having any problems, there is a raise hand button here that you can click. Once you do that, I will send you a message and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you're having. You can always check your audio settings here to make sure that you're connected to the computer audio. If you're ever run into any problems, you can always call in as well. The phone option is available too. And as I mentioned, for questions, there is a questions box here. You can just type in your question, hit send, and Jane will be happy to answer them at the end of her talk today. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Cindy now for the proper introduction.
Well, I hope this is the proper introduction, but anyway, I want to welcome you today, and I hope that everybody's doing well. I hope you're staying cool. But I want to thank you for being with us for this virtual talk, and I'm excited about today's talk. It's a little different from topics that we normally have, and I'm looking forward to it. Now, Andrew has had some great webinars, and we're kind of done for August on that, but coming up on the 14th of September is a financial aid information webinar. So for anybody who has kids going into their final year of, or I guess even if they're juniors or seniors in high school, this would help about getting financial aid information for college. And then on the 22nd is one called Suffragists Speak: Race, Slavery, and the Right to Vote. And I think that that'll also be very interesting. Now, our next author talk, which you will not see at this time if you went right to the events page and looked at our calendar, it's not up there yet. I'm working on it, but it's going to be on September 21st. I was just able to get her. Her name is Carol Simon Levine. She was with us last year in August and did something to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And she's going to do a talk on mothers of invention. She's going to portray Lillian Moeller Gilbreth, who was an inventor for a lot of things that we use in the kitchen, probably still today. And she's going to talk about using her as portrayal. She'll also talk about other women, both from New Jersey or that have a relationship to New Jersey in some way, and how they invented things. And it's going to be things that we don't normally think about as far as inventions and what happened here in New Jersey or locally. So I want to get today's talk underway, though, from Jane Kelly. We've had her before at the State Library. We had her in 2015 to talk about her book, Missing You in Atlantic City. And I'm really glad that she's back with us today to share with us again. And she had sent me her book, Greetings from Ventnor City, but I haven't gotten to read that quite yet. But the pandemic kind of came and I didn't get to read it. So it will be read, though, soon, Jane. And she's a Philadelphia native who started vacationing at the Jersey Shore at the age of 5 months, folks. And she has returned every year since, no matter where she's gone in the world or in the U.S. She's a graduate of Chestnut Hill College. She has an MS in Information Studies from Drexel University, and she has a Master of Philosophy in Popular Literature from Trinity College, University of Dublin. She has served as president of the Delaware Valley Sisters in Crime and on the board of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America. And in 2015, her fourth Meg Daniels mystery, Missing You in Atlantic City, won an Independent Publisher Book Award Silver Medal for Mid-Atlantic Fiction. So she's got awards under her belt. After working in New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Boston, she currently, as I said, lives in the Philadelphia area. The books in the series that we're talking about, you know, setting her mysteries in the Jersey Shore, and I just said and more because she's going to tell us a little bit about research and other things too. But the books are Killing Time in Ocean City. You can see them up there on the screen. Cape Mayhem, Wrong Beach Island, Missing You in Atlantic City, and Greetings from Ventnor City. And there's also a bonus book that's in the series called A Fear of Seaside Heights. And I just love those kind of names. And thank you for these books, Jane, and thank you for what you're going to tell us about. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy for the invitation. I enjoyed my last visit, and I'm happy to be back. I guess the first thing I'm going to talk about is how did these books come to be set in New Jersey? And I'm going to start with that, and the credit goes to the publisher at Plexus Publishing, which publishes the Meg Daniels mystery. Tom Hogan had run for many years, 30, 40 years, I don't know, a company that did a lot of information publishing. There was online information before the internet, and he was one of the biggest players in information on that area, and he continues to publish on information topics. But he had an imprint that was more or less his love, which was about New Jersey, where he would publish things like the Field Guide to the Pine Barrens, other history books, books that were about New Jersey. And in the meantime, while he was doing that, I had written my first book, my first mystery, and I was living in Connecticut at the time. I moved around a lot for my job, as Cindy indicated. And so I had set it there, and I got some pretty good rejection letters. I got an agent, and he said, actually, mine were the best rejection letters he ever had. I thought that's constituted a success, and I really wasn't thinking about writing anything else. And then I encountered Tom at an information conference, and he said that he had felt that the Jersey Shore was neglected in the world of fiction. He had gone on a trip somewhere and visited a lot of seashore type locations, and he would see books set there, and he saw nothing in the Jersey Shore. And so he said, if I could set the book at the Jersey Shore, he would publish it. He said he would think about publishing it. I thought he said he would publish it. I went ahead and did it, and that's how the Meg Daniels mysteries ended up being focused on the Jersey Shore. And it's the whole region. We go from different cities because I think you know that the Cabot Cove syndrome, which is in Murder, She Wrote, where you know the population is 500 and they've had 700 murders, not the actual statistics, but that is more or less the picture. So we kind of cover the entire area. We might set the book in one particular town, but no matter what, there's certain things that always come into play. The Pine Barrens always come into play. The Jersey Devil always gets to stick his head into it. A lot of people go to Atlantic City, even though it's set in smaller towns. And one thing that always, I think frequently at least, shows up is the 1962 Nor'easter, which is a shared history for the region. So it's not just the individual towns, though we do focus on them one at a time, but it's really the whole region of the Jersey Shore. Now, when I had to get started, I wanted to pick a town. And I often tell the story of my mother, who, when I was very young, we went to Wildwood Crest for the entire summer. And my mother said that for her, everyone else was getting a vacation and she was moving her job. So by the time I was 3, we weren't doing that anymore. But as I grew up, I became a friend. And what a friend was, if you were going to the shore for the week, your mother might bring someone along to keep you amused, a friend. I was that friend. And that meant that I got to visit a lot of towns and become familiar and form memories in a lot of different towns. And that figures in the way the Meg Daniels mysteries are done, because Meg's always a tourist. These aren't an insider's view of a town. This is the view of somebody who comes into town and isn't expecting anything bad to happen. And that's really one of the virtues of setting things in vacation locations. People don't expect bad things to happen. So though you would think by now Meg would figure out that, you know, it's happened 6 times now, it's probably going to happen. But she still comes into town not expecting difficulties. and then some mystery will present itself to her. So, as I said, it's not an insider's view. It's somebody not expecting trouble. We decided to use real towns. Well, really, there wasn't any decision to use real towns. I don't think we ever considered not using a real town. We could have set up a fictional shore town, and that makes it a lot easier because, I have a friend, Lisa Reagan, who writes the Josie Quinn series, and she has a town, Denton, PA, which is fictional, and she can put whatever she wants there. If she needed a National Football League stadium to come there, she could do it. I doubt if she would, doesn't seem likely, but she could. It's all under her control. Whereas if you're doing a real town, there is a lot of research that has to be done. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later. So it would be easier to do a fictional town, but we never really considered it. There are fictional elements within every book, and that comes between when bad things versus good things. If something good is going to happen, I can put it in a real place. I have no problem with that. But if something bad is going to happen, I tend to make up a location for that to happen. I often tell the story of, I'll start with a friend of mine's cousin had read my book, and she told me he read my book, but he didn't like it because it didn't have enough sex in it. And the genre I write in really shouldn't have any sex in it. But I thought, well, just put a hint in and have a comical part where Meg and Andy, her PI boyfriend, stumble into what they soon figure out is going to turn into an orgy. And I described the house in some detail, and it had a blue door that how you would identify where to go. And before I did that, I rode all over town. It was on Long Beach Island, and made sure there was no house that fit this description. But I always say, as soon as you get in the car and you head away, that somebody is out painting their door blue, and there's nothing you can do about that. But I try never to put anything controversial in a real location. And I'm going to digress for a moment because the other topic that ties in with that are names, and that you don't want to put, you want to be careful not to use real names. And again, that's something that can change all the time. Maybe you can't find people in a specific area, but I'm very careful about searching for names. And they have to be, and I'm going to talk a little bit about naming now, just because we're on the topic. The names have to be authentic. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Social Security database that lets you see the names that were popular in any different decade. And you can go through and see what was number one in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, etc. And I try to pick names that come from there. And you can also break it down to the state level. And I do that for two reasons. One, to make sure that the names are common and would appear or reasonable to appear on a given character. But the other, to make sure if there's only one, Meg Daniels, born in the state of Pennsylvania in the 1980s, that I'm not picking her name, that I can have a name that is, stick with a name that is not unique. The other thing I like to consider when naming characters is who their parents are and what they would name them. In the book I'm working on now, I have a very prim and proper woman, and for a long time, her daughter was named Lisa. And I realized that Lisa was a very popular name at that time. So coming out of the database, it would have make a lot of sense if I just looked at popular names for the time period she was born. But then I realized her mother was very prim and proper. She would not have named her daughter, given her daughter a popular name. She would have stuck with the names of the kings and queens of England. So I changed her name to Elizabeth, but with an S, so to appease the father who wanted to name the child Lisa. So it's not just the era when the character is born, it's who are their parents, what's their background? Do they have a strong ethnic background that they might give a name, an Irish name, an Italian name? Or are they immigrants who don't want to be true to their heritage and might try to pick the most American name? Like in one book, it's Sally, because that's the most American name the fella can think of. And it's just something when you're reading books, I don't know how much attention you pay to what the characters' names are. I mean, the simple thing is I try to make sure I can remember them. I'm very proud, fond of double consonants because it's easier to remember than, two initials. But you want to make sure you don't have two people name beginning with a D, two people beginning, with an S. So it's kind of a, can take a lot of time and a lot of research to come up with particular names. And sometimes after that, a character doesn't seem to fit into the name. It just doesn't seem to work for them. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and start it over and find a name that's appropriate for them. But that was a little tangent I went off on names. And I'm going to go back to, picking a town. And we wanted it to be a vacation spot. As I told you, Meg is always a tourist. She doesn't have the inside story. And these are not books about the inside story on any town. Yeah, it might get referred to in terms of the changes in the, in the building generations that go on in shore towns. But that's not what it's about. That's the background. So, the town influences the story, though. If I'm looking at a particular town, they sort of have an image that, just have a list here of like Ocean City. It was basically family town. Cape May, historical and romantic. Long Beach Island, very beachy, lots of different towns. So you want the town to have an influence on the book that you're writing. But
looks like your webcam got turned off.
Oh my gosh.
There we go.
Sorry about that. So thank you. Thanks, Andrew. So, but that's as far as it's not the story of the town, it's a mystery. And it's important to know what these books are not. They're not travel guides. You can't have everything in there that somebody should do when they're in town. And my favorite is the book I'm going to hold up. I think this will show in the right direction. Killing Time in Ocean City. Very dark. Even if it's backwards, you can see it's a very dark cover. Darker than the mystery really is. But one time I was doing a book signing and a man came up to me and asked me if it was a guidebook. And I have to say, I explained no, but I don't think I'd go to a town with this as a guidebook cover, but that's another topic. Covers are a whole other issue that we could talk about. And the other thing is, these books are not a history of the town. They're not, not everything can go in. It's really, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's really tempting to put something in because you know it, but it may not help the story. And if it doesn't move the story forward, you really can't put it in. It just slows it down. It may be interesting. I forget who it was who said, when you're editing, you leave out the part of the book that people won't read, that they find boring. And sometimes, some people might be really interested, the story of the town, but most times people are there to read the mystery. And so you have to be very judicious in how much you include and that it makes sense that you include it. So before I really start talking about research, I wanted to say that my books, which you saw on that great graphic that Cindy did, they divide into two groups: Ocean City, Cape May, and Long Beach Island, which is Killing Time in Ocean City, Cape Mayhem, and Long Beach Island. They were written now 20 years ago, and they all have a contemporary amateur sleuth. So there was no historical research done. There was a lot of research done, but it was all location research. When I got to the Atlantic City book, Missing You in Atlantic City, and Greetings from Ventnor City, they have a historical component to them. And I'll talk more about that because that adds, you still have to do all the location research, but now you have to do the same research for another time period, plus other just traditional more time period research. So these books, I said I thought the cover on Killing Time was a little dark. I don't know how many of you are avid mystery readers, but there's a range of mysteries. When I read a lot of mysteries before I ever wrote one, I didn't really know what I was reading. I just grouped them all as mysteries. But now, on one end, you have the thriller, the suspense novel, the police procedural, the detective, the private detective, then the traditional mysteries, which are kind of the legacy of Agatha Christie. And then you have the cozies, which are what I would call like the softest of the group. Mine are traditional, but they're right on the cusp of cozy. I always say they're very polite. There's no blood and guts. If that's what you like, you're really not going to like these books. But they have an amateur detective, which is a trait of a cozy. They have a small cast of characters, again, a trait of a cozy. No on-screen sex or violence, again, cozy. But usually a cozy will go a little bit farther in terms of, generally the amateur sleuth has a business, or typically it could be anything, but a lot of times you'll see it's either a hobby they have, a craft they do, or a business they run. Making cupcakes is a huge one. There's a lot of cupcake. It's not quite that far over. My heroine she has a job, but it doesn't occur. You don't see it in the book because she's in a vacation locale. So her job isn't an important part of that. And sadly, she has no pets. And that's largely because I'm allergic to cats and dogs, and that makes it very hard for me to involve a pet. And also, the lifestyle she's living really isn't conducive to that. Though lately I've decided that she and her boyfriend, Andy, can start doing pet sitting, and that might add another cozy element to it. But they're not what I would categorize as cozies. It's tough for amateur detectives in the modern day because all the technology that was developed. And even in the original times when amateur detectives came out, the police are not dumb. The police are not stupid. It's hard to outwit them to get to a solution before they can do it. With DNA and all that testing, it's almost impossible. So a lot of people, I think, have looked backward to look at some cold cases, just because it's more reasonable for an amateur sleuth to solve those cases. And my later day books still have a current day sleuth, but she's looking at a historical crime. And she isn't going to find physical evidence. What she hopes to find is somebody who's been waiting for 50 years for somebody to ask them the question, or some picture to show up. But it does make it a lot easier for an amateur sleuth to solve a mystery if it's a crime that was committed in the past. There are other challenges, but the police, it's easy to keep the police out of it, that they're not looking at it, and that gives her a lot of freedom. Now, I mentioned that the historical issue, that's a little easier. Cell phones in and of themselves, I mean, all technology matters. The internet. I mean, if you watch any older mysteries on television, you would think, why don't they just look it up on the internet? Well, they can't. They couldn't. And it's easy to forget that. And it's very hard to track when people could start doing that. What exact year did all technology kick in, and when did it apply? So it's a real challenge. But the biggest thing is cell phones. That's the biggest difference. And also the level of cell phones. Again, to watch the years when the technology kicked in. When were flip phones possible? When were those big brick ones, the first ones to come out? And then when were flip phones in? And then when did we finally get to smartphones, which changed the game forever? In Missing You in Atlantic City, the crime that's committed, if it were committed today, somebody would have their cell phone out. It would have been taped. It would have been taped, listen to me, there's old technology. It would have been recorded, and it would have been solved, and the book would have been over on page 3. So it's very you know, there's a real advantages to looking at crimes that happened in the past. And one of the reasons I like doing that is I think it adds substance and to the book to have that kind of I just disappeared from myself. There I am. Okay. To have, you know, a little meat behind the story, and I enjoy that, and I love the research doing it. And as I said, there are two kinds of research. Every book I do, you have to research the location, every book. And then for the ones that come in that second grouping, the last two books and the one I'm working on now, the historical research kicks in. So the two books that have the historical research are Missing You in Atlantic City, which is set in 1964. Well, the crime takes place in 1964. It's a current day amateur sleuth. And it takes place with the backdrop of the Democratic Convention, which was held in Atlantic City in 1964. That would have been, for those who don't remember 1964, that would have been Johnson being nominated 9 months after the assassination of John Kennedy. He would have been running against Barry Goldwater. And at the same time, there would have been a lot of social change going on across the country. The Civil Rights Act movement was very active, and that figured in at the Democratic Convention. So there's a lot of meat behind, a lot of substance behind the mystery. And the character interacts with the events, but never with specific people. I don't put real historical characters in the book. Some people do, but I don't have, in this case, it would be Betty Boyle, interact. She may see Robert Kennedy, she may see Martin Luther King, but she doesn't interact with them. I never put words in other people's mouth, though a lot of writers do. They will, you know, imagine dialogue for existing people. I don't do that. The second book, Greetings from Ventnor City, is set in 1968. And it might sound like a trivial thing that it's set across against the backdrop of the Miss America pageant. But the 1968 Miss America pageant and the protests that took place there are a pivotal moment in second wave feminism. So it's not just, you know, a distraction to put it behind there. It's definitely, it provides real, I'm trying to think of the word. What I like to do is have a parallel development for the event that's going on behind and the person and how they're developing. So it really gives some substance to the book, but it's still a mystery. It's not a history book. It's not, it'll explain anything that without going overboard, but it will explain what is happening. I should say before I go on that my first three books have become accidentally historic because they're old. And you know, they don't touch on any big issues intentionally. Who knows what a deep read would do? But they have things in them like, you know, in Killing Time in Ocean City, there was a phone booth at 34th Street in Ocean City. And most people, if they wanted to make a call, they had to go out and line up to use the phone booth at 34th Street in Ocean City. I'm sure there were others. But, and also just the weirdness of the trouble somebody can get in if they don't have a cell phone. Cell phones just changed the game for mysteries completely. So, as I said, we don't do any town, I just want to make sure we don't do any heavy town issues. For example, if there's a character in the Killing Time in Ocean City book who's angry about the development in the town, but he's a character, he's there, he voices his opinion, but there's nothing going on that is really says that's the issue this book is about. It's simply a segue. Cape Mayhem, historical preservation comes up, but that's not what the book is about. It's about the mystery, and it's always about the mystery and solving the crime. One thing I want to say about the book Fear of Seaside Heights, that's a Meg Daniels mystery. It's the one that wasn't published by Plexus Publishing. And it came from a reader request. I had never spent the night in Seaside Heights. I had been there, but I had never spent the night. But I would go out for the other two books and I would do library groups and book clubs, and they all asked for something about Seaside Heights. So I had a friend who, oddly enough, lived in Massachusetts, but as a child had gone to Seaside Heights. And she said it was so exciting because in the daytime, she would be on the beach and she would look up at the amusements and she would think, oh, today I'm here and this is great. And tonight I'm going to be there. So when I went to learn about Seaside Heights, it was her attitude that I carried with me to look at Seaside Heights from a child's viewpoint. And I also learned, and this is another aside, I also learned something when working on this book. When you have a character in a series, they have to develop, they have to learn things. They can't just be the same, really pretty much naive person they start out when they're first going to be an amateur sleuth. So in this case, in one of the earlier books, Meg is snooping around. She gets pushed into some sort of shed. The shed is set on fire. Obviously, she's rescued or rescues herself. I can't quite remember how it worked out. But when she gets to Seaside Heights, there's a freezer. She's going undercover in an ice cream store, and there's a freezer. And that freezer just cries out for a character to be locked in it. But it can't be done because she has to learn. She got locked in a shed before, so she can't let herself be locked in the freezer, no matter how much comic effect it might have. She can't let that happen. So just to make sure the character learns something and retains something. And sometimes it could be something small. I remember going to a conference once and somebody in the audience asked a question about something that really bothered them. And what bothered them was that any detective or sleuth would get beaten up and then they would never have bruises and they would never hurt and they would get up and they would walk away. And there are just certain things that are said that you retain forever. And I think mine was, Meg doesn't get in big fights, but she does find herself occasionally getting bruised. And I wanted to make sure that she wasn't up and doing the same thing the next day. So she has to learn in the broader sense, and she has to learn, day to day. She has to remember day to day what had happened. While we're on Seaside Heights, it's a good example of things that there's so many things, so many attractions in Seaside Heights that you could use in a book, but you can't use them all. As I said before, it's not a guidebook. And what has to guide you is that it has to be logical. I once got a review, which I have to say was, well, the last paragraph was really good because in the last paragraph, the reviewer said it was a shame, so you can get what's coming before that, because the characters were good, the dialogue was good, they liked everything, but it wasn't the book I think that he would have written. And my argument with it, well, I'll tell you the thing he said that I recall. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Holgate, which is the town at the southern tip of Long Beach Island. I haven't been there in a few years, but when this book was written, it was in the winter. It was desolate. A lot of people were not down there. They were not staying the time, there in the winter. And so at some point, Meg finds herself in trouble down there and she has to escape. And truthfully, I don't remember what she does do, but I remember what she doesn't do. And the reviewer said it would have been better if she had run from house to house, banging on the doors of the empty houses. And to me, that's not logical. I mean, if he wanted to do that and he wanted to have them hide, fine, but it wasn't logical to me that she would do that. She has to be smart. She can't be silly. It has to be somehow realistic, what you're doing, what you're having your characters do. So it wasn't the book that he would have written, but I have to say that I stand by it. I still would not have her run around and bang on the doors. Likewise, I would love to use lighthouses, both on LBI and in Cape May. It'd be wonderful to have her, be threatened at the top of a lighthouse, but what is she going to be dumb enough to do to get herself up there to put herself in danger? So I haven't used them yet. She's not going to chase a criminal up there because there's no winning once you get up there. And I guess I could at some point have her go to the top and just look out and have the criminal come up and find her. but how's she going to get down? I haven't figured that out yet, unless she's going to push him off the lighthouse. And she's not that kind of character. She doesn't do violent things. So we have to work on that for a while. But just because it's appealing, it can't be included. It has to be logical. Everything that, that's used, whether historical, it has to tie in with the theme, or whether it's a location point, it has to be logical. It has to make sense in terms of the mystery. Now, some of these sites can be used for conversation. I mean, you can get on the Ferris wheel in Seaside Heights or Ocean City and have a conversation, and that's great. There are other sites. You can go to the Cape May Mall. You can go to the Ocean City Boardwalk. That all makes sense for conversation. But you can't have something illogical happen just because you want to use the site. I did push it with the Sky Ride in Seaside Heights. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Sky Ride in Seaside Heights. I think it's about 20 feet off the ground and it runs along the boardwalk. And I did have her take it home a few times after her undergraduate job scooping ice cream. Would she really do that? I don't know, but it wasn't a ridiculous stretch. It was cool up there too, because there's a breeze that high. So how do I do all this location research? I'll start with. I do a lot of driving, and I try to drive in the season when the book is set, because speed limits change, traffic lights are turned on and off, things are different. So I do a whole lot of driving. If I'm going to put a restaurant in a book, I eat there. I go there, I make sure the menu is consistent with what she could be eating. I once went just at the very last check and ate in a restaurant, and I got sick. So I took that out and replaced it with another restaurant. It might have been a once in a lifetime thing for them, but I couldn't put it in because I don't know about other people, but there used to be a series called Bantam New Fiction. There may still be, but I don't know what's up. And it would be first books by new authors. And they would invariably, they were usually set in New York where I was living at the time, and they would invariably include their favorite restaurant. And I would invariably go to their favorite restaurant to check it out. So I'm very conscious of making sure that if I put a restaurant in there, I've checked it and it's good. I would even walk around so I would have the perspective. If I say you can see something from a certain point, you can see it from that point. I would walk to that point and I would look. And so, I sometimes may have gone overboard. I talk often about the time I had her slide off a bar stool in a restaurant in Summers Point that had since changed hands many times and I think was eventually torn down. But I went back and checked what was the covering on the bar stools? Could she really slip off it, or was that ridiculous? Probably the level of research was a little ridiculous, but I just wasn't happy unless I knew that she could in fact slide off that bar stool. So it pays off. I got a text recently from a gentleman who had checked the locations on Missing You in Atlantic City. And I was so excited because he had found that they all checked out. And he cited ones that he had gone to look at. And I had friends drive me all over Atlantic City, making sure. One he cited that I remember is there was an alley beside the restaurant and everything was geared to the actual structure. And that's going back to the start. That's what you have to do if you're going to use a real location. You really might want to, take that kind of care. And there's some things that I regret that I forgot to include that I could have easily included. One thing, I'm not much of a drinker. And when Meg goes to Ocean City and Killing Time in Ocean City, she does bring alcohol along to stock the house. I never mentioned it was a dry town. That's important to a lot of people, but it never, ever occurred to me to mention that Ocean City was a dry town. So that's why that was my first book, and I was reluctant to talk to a lot of people to present myself as an author, but it's a good reason for presenting yourself as an author and going around and talking to a lot of people, because as many people as I did talk to, nobody happened to mention it. So I didn't mention it. The other thing I kind of feel bad about in Long Beach Island is I never call the Barnegat Lighthouse Old Barney, never. I never call Philadelphia Philly. I don't abbreviate things like that. But I think it should have been in there because so many people do. So I think I really shouldn't have followed that. One thing that's not quite the same, but in Missing You in Atlantic City, there's a line where, the Democrats leave town and then the detectives go out and they start back in 1964 in interviewing people. And the one fella says, now that the Dems are gone, we can follow up on this. And what I didn't know, and this goes back to my library research, where I did research for the days of the Democratic convention, I didn't know that the Beatles came to town the next day. So the police were not free because the Democrats were gone. And it only would have been one subordinate cause. I mean, it might have been now that a couple words, now that the Dems and the mop tops are gone, we can investigate that. Still bothers me that I missed it. So, and there are things I would have loved to have used, but I couldn't find out a logical way to put it in, like a jitney. I can't figure out why a criminal would take the time to take a jitney, or a detective trailing a criminal would take the time to follow the jitney. So that's something I'm going to work on, because jitneys were a big part of my childhood, or the excitement of going to the shore when I was a kid. When we were in Ventnor, the jitneys were a huge part of that. So I'd love to bring it in. The books, I've talked about the different eras they cover. The way the books are structured is the first person narrator is an amateur detective, current day, a contemporary woman, and she researches and she finds people to interview. When she talks to witnesses, their testimony is from the point of view of that person in the era when the book was written, which for me is a lot of fun, because that means that's where I get to use all the historical research, and that's where I really go crazy on research. I'm trying to think of like places you can, I mean, I always start at the library, but you'd be amazed what you can find it on YouTube, especially if you're looking, I should say this during location, especially if you're looking for what places look like before. You can find tons of stuff on YouTube. You can find diaries. That was really important in the Ventnor book, finding out what was going on with the protesters who were outside the Miss America pageant that year. They kept diaries and they wrote stories about them. I love newspaper morgues. I love newspapers. I love the idea that everything about a culture is there for you. And I look at what was playing at the movies, and I look at people's horoscopes too. Though I'm afraid to put it in, because I'm afraid someone will say to me, nah, he's not behaving like an Aries. So I don't usually tell any main character's horoscope. The victim, maybe, because he's not acting now, and nobody can say he's not acting like a Virgo or whatever. I just really can get carried away on that. Now, one way, I talked about technology. One way is language. And I have a little bit of time left, and I just want to talk about Google Engrams. I don't know if anybody here has ever used Google Engrams, if you would have any reason to use Google Engram. And it's Google, it's capital N-G-R-A-M, Engram. And what it is, it's the searchable version of things that were published in any range of years. I don't remember now how far it goes back, because I don't go back to the beginning, but you can look at it for a huge range of years or just for a couple of years to see when a phrase got popular. There are faults because it's what was published. It's not what's being said on the street, but it still gives you a fairly good idea of what words were popular when. I started using it when in the Atlantic City book, it had to be almost the final read. One of the characters said about Betty Boyle that she kept her cool. And it was 1964. Now, because of my age, I kind of sensed that you couldn't keep your cool in 1964. You could keep a cool head, you could keep a cool demeanor, but you couldn't keep your cool until about 1967. And I was able to go into Engrams, and they chart for you. You don't have to do a lot of reading. They draw a chart for you. And you could see that the word became more and more popular as time went on. And so that really, I became addicted to it. And I could, spend hours on it looking up terms. It's amazing, and I'm sure you know this, how many terms came from Shakespeare that I was thinking, did they say that in 1964? They said it in 1664 or whatever. It was an old term. Just another thing I do is I keep my research now on Pinterest. I have a habit of doing research, recording it, not quite remembering where I recorded it. You know, it might be in a voice memo. I keep notebooks now that are pretty good, but I put a lot on Pinterest, and that's there for anybody to look at if they're interested in the period, if you're interested in 1964 and what was going on. And one of the things I really love to do is soundtracks. It started with The Fear of Seaside Heights. That book takes place during a drought, during a heat wave. So there's a soundtrack on my Pinterest page, or whatever you call a Pinterest site, which is Jane Kelly 80. And it has a lot of songs like, of course, Heat Wave, and then a lot of rain songs, like, because everybody's hoping for rain. So for Missing You in Atlantic City, a lot of tunes from 1964, things the heroine would have heard, that she would have been listening to. Greetings from Ventnor City, same for 1968, songs that the characters would have been listening to. There are other groupings too, some television they might have seen, some commercials that were on. I try to give the broad picture of the era, but I really like the soundtracks. They're a lot of fun. I think we can go to questions in a minute or two. I just want to tell one last story about research serendipity. And that was, I needed a site in Baltimore. And I had already written the scene in great detail. And I went to meet friends for lunch in Baltimore, and then I was going to ride around looking for a site that would somewhat fit it. The owner of the restaurant said to me, handed me her card and said, "Why don't you go to my house?" I hadn't told her what the scene looked like. I just said I needed a park, a stream, maybe. It was so uncanny. I needed rocks in a certain configuration. And when I got there, I had to change the angle at which the path went into the park, but that was the only thing I had to change. I had the entire location described, including the houses on the street, perfectly before I got there. But that doesn't usually happen. So research is not usually that easy, but I love it. I think it's a lot of fun. So I hope I get it all right. I work on it. But Andrew, do we have any questions? I've been going for 45 minutes here, 50 minutes.
Thank you. No questions yet, but if anybody does have any questions, please, you can type them in the questions box in the dashboard, and we'll be happy to answer them. Cindy, I don't know if you have any questions.
I have a couple. I just wondered, and thank you for sharing this, your insight to your writing. Sometimes that even makes the book better, at least for me, to know that background thing. And I love doing research as well. So, but I wanted to ask, do you think of your titles, or do you have assistants? And do you think of the city first that you're going to place it in, or I guess I'm getting too many questions here. But anyway, do you think of your own titles, or do you have assistance with that?
The publisher, Plexus, will help with it. I think I have come up with all of the titles. The first one, Killing Time in Ocean City, the book was written. I had no idea what to call it. But she was there on vacation and there was a killing. So we came up with Killing Time in Ocean City. Mystery books very often have puns for titles. So Cape Mayhem just sort of left out, and there is some mayhem involved in getting to the murder. So that, came out. Wrong Beach Island, a pun. Again, I think I came up with that. We discussed it with the publisher. A Fear of Seaside Heights, which I published independently. The editor at Plexus really didn't like that. He was afraid people would think it was being critical of Seaside Heights, but I just thought it was a play on a fear of heights, so that's why I went with it. But the last two, Greetings from Ventnor City and Missing You Atlantic City, because they have a flashback to the past, I wanted to have names that were like phrases you would find on old postcards. And so that's why I went with those. And I'm working on a book now that's set in Avalon. And I'm concerned because it doesn't get out into Avalon as much, largely because of the pandemic, but that's another story. I'm not sure if I want to go with a postcard title for that, but I like the idea of a postcard because when you're looking back to a past time. So they kind of come from different places. Does that solve that, answer that for you?
It does. It does. Thank you very much. And I just wondered, do your settings infer that you might like as a writing spot someplace near the ocean and that? Like, what is a favorite writing spot for you?
I like being in a noisy place. I like taking my book out to lunch. I like taking my book out to dinner. I'll take it out and work. I like that a lot. I don't think that's uncommon. I don't know why, but I think a lot of people like to write in public places. I do prefer if it can be on the water, but often it can't be. And also, it can't be at a time when you're hogging a table. It has to be somewhere where you're not hogging a table that somebody's waiting for. So no, but I would love to. If I'm sure I wouldn't have to go out if I had a porch that overlooked a rocky beach. I'm pretty sure I'd be with waves crashing on it. I think I could stay there and cook for myself. But mostly I like to go out, and there are always other writers there. You see them there, and
Yeah,
I like
I
to
know one
encourage.
writer that he frequents an Arby's. I mean, they know, and he frequents an Arby's and likes to write at this Arby's. And just, he just likes to write. He likes the people going in and out, and he likes to write his books at this Arby's. And they really know him there. So, it's interesting. So I just thought, let me ask that question. I don't know if there's any other questions, but I wanted to ask at least those two.
Yeah, we have some questions coming in. First, not a question, but thank you for presenting this program. The library I work at is reading Killing Time in Ocean City for our September Mystery Book Club selection. So I'm
Oh,
delighted
okay.
to attend your talk, and thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just put in something there? Because this is a great segue, Andrew, is that
Yeah.
for those with the book clubs, I was on .net, janekelly.net, and that has her books in that, but it also has questions with her books. She has, if you scroll down, you'll see questions for book clubs. And if you go in there and you pick the book, then she has questions on that particular book that you might want to try addressing or not, but they're there. And also, I'm going to use that to say the Pinterest thing that she was talking about is also there on janekelly.net. You will find her Pinterest thing that would give the historical sites and stuff, or the historical information that she finds and puts up on Pinterest. Okay, I'm out.
Andrew, did you have another question?
Yes. Are your early books still in print, such as Killing Time and Ocean City?
It is in print, but pretty much I think at this point it was only ever done in hardback. And you might find, you can buy it through Amazon, I think. I'm not sure if still through Barnes and Noble or through the publisher. And that's true for Cape Mayhem and Wrong Beach Island. Wrong Beach Island, the hardback, it's now only paperback. The hardback doesn't, all the other ones are paperbacks. But the first three originally came out as hardbacks. And then Wrong Beach Island followed by a paperback, and then paperbacks after that.
Think Meg will take a vacation in Dublin.
Oh, well, I lived in Dublin. I went back to school when I was 57. And the reason I did it was I was on a panel of writers at a conference, and it came down down the lane, people introducing themselves, and somebody said, I'm so and so, I just finished the writers program at the University of Iowa, and somebody else said, yeah, I'm so and so, I have an MFA from Columbia, and I said, I'm Jane Kelly. So I thought maybe I should do a little, get some credentials to be doing what I'm doing, and I went back to Trinity College when I was 57, and I loved it. I thought I would cry every night, that no one would talk to me, but everyone was great to me. All the students included me. I mean, I knew when not to go along, but pub life over there is multi-generational, so it was no problem. I was invited along. And so I think Meg could go over there. Andy is going back to school, and maybe he'll go over and she can go with him and solve some mysteries over there. So she'll like it. She'll have a good time.
Thank you for your stories. Can you please talk more about the business aspects of getting published? Could you explain how to go about this?
This is really a tough thing. My road to getting published was very weird because I knew my publisher and he was looking for someone who would write a book that would fit into his, mission. So that's very unusual. And also that was like 20 years ago, and things have changed so much. It's really, really difficult now. You just have to follow all the rules and query agents, and there's tons of information online. The one thing I will say is you have to go to the agent and offer them only what they want. I mean, I don't know how really original ideas get through to agents because very often they're very specific about what they want. They will have it all listed on their website, and you really kind of have to write to market. It has to be something that they're looking for, and who knows what the market will want the next time. It's a really tough road for people now. And that's why so many people are doing independent publishing. I published a couple of books in another series independently, in addition to these books, and I don't do enough to promote them. It's really like, but I look at all the information on the web, I give my age away so often, on the internet, and and all the effort people are making, it's really tough. It's a full-time job to, get those books put together and get them out to market. But some people are doing it very successfully. I wish there were some secret. I mean, I have 2 books that I wrote that are not in the mystery genre, and I haven't had any luck with them. And I should work harder. Actually, that's what I should say. If you just keep at it and keep going, someone, I don't know if you've seen the meme on the internet that says, please keep going. I got 48 rejection letters before I got number 49. And it's like, but people go through those numbers. I can't remember. I mentioned my friend Lisa Reagan earlier, and this week she came out number 9, I think, on her book debuted on the USA Today bestseller list. And I think it's number 2 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list for ebook. And I think she was rejected by 41 publishers before she got published. So I think just being relentless is the key, and do a better job of it than I do, because I really need to get on that. But when you want to write, it's tempting to write. And when you do have deadlines, for books, it's hard to split your time and do the 2 things. But I know that isn't much help, but it's sort of the way it is. But be relentless.
Can you hear your characters talking, and do it ever take you down a different path than originally set?
I absolutely can hear them talking. And if I can't hear them talking, they're not developed far enough. Yeah, I can hear them very clearly. And they do take on a personality of their own. I'm what they call a pantser. If you're a mystery fan, there are 2 ways people write mystery books. They're either plotters, where they carefully plot everything out, or they're pantsers, where they do it more or less by the seat of their pants. And I'm trying to become more of a plotter, but I'm pretty much of a pantser. And that allows the characters to just take and, run with things. And I know people say it's ridiculous that a character can surprise you, but they can. And I remember having an argument with a friend, a woman I worked with years ago, about somebody, I can't remember what the exact topic was, by characters in the book. And she said, I think he knew. I said, do you? I don't think he knew. And she said, no, he knew. I said, really? I mean, and I was open to the idea that he knew, because these characters do take on a life of their own. And I think if you can't hear them, and if they don't sound different enough from each other, that you've got to keep going to develop them further. My take on it.
What's your favorite book to write?
Favorite book to write? Actually, it's one of the ones that wasn't published. Or let's say it isn't published yet. It's It's kind of a cross-genre book, which is a problem. It's romantic, but it's not a romance. And I got the idea when I was at the the main branch of the US Post Office gift shop, which you probably didn't know there was such a thing. And I bought a cassette of World War II songs. And I listened to them and it made me cry, and these characters leapt into my mind. But it took me about 20 years to get them all developed and down on paper. So I guess it was hard for like 18 years, but when it finally felt right, it was just a lot of fun. There was no crying. I didn't have to worry about, I had to worry a lot about plotting, but not clues and planning clues and all. So that was really a lot of fun. Of the Meg books, I liked writing them all. The only one that I found really hard was the one I wrote during the pandemic, because I think I wasn't getting enough stimulation. I wasn't hearing the characters for a long time. I hear them now. So that was the hardest. But the others, I really liked writing all of them. So I just have one thing to add. I just thought of. If there are characters that are really strong, that's why you like writing the book. Like George and Claude appeared in Cape Mayhem, and they appear later. And they're really readers' favorite characters, and they're great to write for. So whenever they're in a scene, I like writing that probably better than anything else.
What is your biggest struggle as a writer, and how do you overcome it?
Well, lately it's been procrastination, which is kind of new for me. I really think the pandemic changed a lot of things because so much of what I did was outdoor. I'd be out writing, I'd be in a coffee shop writing, I'd be driving around doing research, and all of that went away. And so I was left with this huge amount of hours where I could write, and I would take advantage of that, but I would just wear out after a while, and sometimes I wouldn't want to go back. So for me, I think moving from location to location and keeping myself fresh is my biggest challenge. I realize now. And it's like if you write for 2 hours and then you get in the car, like sometimes I would go to a coffee shop for 2 hours, get in the car, drive to a library where I would sit for another 2 hours. But during that time period when I was changing location, there's time to mull over what you wrote and think about what's coming up. So I think if I can get back to doing that, that's the biggest challenge for myself, dealing with a personality that likes to move around all the time. I was asked to mime my 9-month-old great nephew once, and my niece said to me, if he gets bored, just take him to another room. If he cries, take him to another room. And I think it may be genetic, because I can recharge if I just get into a different location. So right now, that's my challenge, getting out there.
Write multiple stories / books at the same time?
I do. And that ties into the idea of really kind of needing to take a break from a book. I think you always need, you write a lot of stuff and it looks good when you're writing it down. And then you edit it and you think it looks good. And then you step away for a few weeks and you come back and it doesn't look horrible, but you just realize it could look better. So what I tend to do is I tend to do different writing and mostly another book in there. I do have a blog, but I keep it mostly for myself. It's stories that I won't forget from when I was younger. And sometimes I'll write them because that's a different kind of writing. But yeah, I think it's good to be able to switch back and forth. When it gets near the end though, then I just focus on one book and finish it. When I feel that, you know, I'm coming to the end, like I just was away from the Avalon book for 2 weeks and I'm back in it now, and I will stick with that until I finish it. And then maybe then it'll be going to my publisher and they'll be reading it. So we'll get some perspective there. But yeah, I like to switch. I like to keep fresh, switch back and forth.
Do you stop research or know it's enough?
That's a really good question. That is tough to know when it's enough. I think you find a lot of people who don't know when to stop, both in terms of doing the research and putting the research into the story, because you become so enamored of it. And some things are so fascinating. And you know you could mention it, it happened that day, But if there's no logical reason to mention it, you can't do it. So that's an ongoing problem that I think a lot of people have. And just at some point, you really have to set a date when what you have is what you have. You can always go out and fill in, but you could just spend 6 months researching and never write a word, and that's a danger. So I would be cautious about too much research, and I should take my own advice.
Looks like that is all the questions that we have. So Cindy, do you want to say a
I
farewell
do.
for us?
I wanna thank everybody who joined us today and stayed with us. If you know someone that you think would like to hear this again, or perhaps you want to just go over and listen to all the great things that Jane said about how she writes, we have recorded this and it will be up on the New Jersey State Library YouTube channel. If you are, I know that we're not fully open, we're open with some appointments and that, but we do have all of these books, except the Seaside Heights one. So right now we have all of Jane's books in the Meg Daniels series, and that's where I read them from. Was I went upstairs and looked around and I saw Killing Time in Ocean City, and I thought that was cool. And then I do like a good pun, and so you know, I went on to Cape Mayhem. I think that might have been one of my favorites, and at least one scene in that book that was pretty comical. I really enjoyed Jane, and I'm not going to do a spoiler, so don't worry. But I just encourage you to either tell your friends that there's other things. Andrew does a wonderful job on outreach with webinars. As I said, he has one financial aid, but we have sometimes on Medicare, we have genealogical ones. We just did one with a person who talked about how to find things on, using digital newspapers for your genealogical research. And those are up on our YouTube channel. So take advantage of that, if you would like to, and do it in your own time. But Jane is going to be up on the YouTube channel as well, and that's New Jersey State Library. So I just want to thank you so much, Jane, for being with us today. And I learned a lot. And, sometimes I would like to delve into writing, but like you said, there's a lot of different things now today. So I'm a little afraid of doing something like that. But just want to encourage you guys all next time. I think you'll enjoy Karen Simon Levine as she does a portrayal. She's very good. She's a very good storyteller. And to find out about those mothers of invention. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Andrew, and thanks everyone. Thank you.